Kentucky politics is an ever-changing environment, and as our system evolves, it's important to look back and remember where we've been to learn valuable lessons. In the Bottom Line's newest series, Kentucky Narratives, we'll sit down with big names from both sides of the aisle who've had an impact on Kentucky politics to hear their stories. Mr. McBrayer, thank you so much for sitting down with me today and being the first to participate in this series for the Bottom Line.
I'm delighted.
So, for people who don't know, give me kind of an overview of your time in Kentucky politics.
Well, I'm 82 years old. I've been practicing law 57 years. I started out in Greenup as a single little tiny office lawyer, and we have now 67 lawyers in our office. When I was in Greenup, I had no law practice whatsoever. And so I decided that I would run for state representative, and it would get me known. I would campaign, and it would get me known and get around the county. And so I ran for state representative against my next door neighbor, who we literally burned trash out of the same barrel. Nobody would remember that now, but that's when you used to burn your trash in a barrel. And totally unexpected, I won. And so I went to the legislature, served 10 years, and then Governor Carroll was lieutenant governor. Wendell Ford went to the Senate. Wendell Ford was the governor, went to the Senate, and so Julian Carroll stepped up as governor. And so basically Julian was a 5-year governor because he stepped up 1 year. I resigned from the legislature at the time, and I was the majority leader, and I resigned to handle the transition of government from from Wendell over to Julian, Governor Ford over to Governor Carroll. And at that time, there were two of us that handled the transition, Hank Lindsay and myself. Today they have cast of hundreds that do all this interviewing and everything. Back then we knew them all. So we knew the good ones and the bad ones, and the funniest thing was that at the time we asked Governor Ford's staff who he would suggest. We were kind of political odds at the time. Said who should we keep and who should we let go? And so we let go and didn't rehire a number of them, and they got mad at us, but it was because Ford's staff told us not to hire them because they wouldn't work. But they got all mad at us. Of course, we never did say anything. And so then I stayed on and was governor's chief executive officer. And then after he was elected for the full 4-year term, I left, went back to law practice, then came back to state government because Burt Combs, former governor, and others that were trying to get me ready to run for governor thought that I should come back. I came back as Commerce Commissioner. And so I did that, and then I ultimately ran for governor and was defeated by John Y. Brown, who the two of us are personal friends. He came over to the house last night. I've been sick with all this cancer and everything and can't get out much, and he came over last night and visited. He's not in good health, and so he beat me fair and square. Never looked back. Was broke, totally broke. People think there's money in politics. It's like a horse business. Start out as a multi-millionaire and end up as a millionaire in the horse business. Well, politics is the same thing. There's no money in politics unless you want to be a crook. That's different. But if you want to do it straight up and have some principles about you, there's literally no money. And so particularly if you don't have any money, it's doubly difficult to do. So I ran for governor, was defeated, came back, totally broke, started my law practice back again. Now we have 65, 66, 67 lawyers. And but I worked hard. And So I was on the Democratic National Committee for 16, 17 years. I was chairman of the Democratic Party, ran Paul Patton's campaign, and so we were victorious, and a lot of people gave us the credit, me the credit, for adding grassroots. I'm still a great believer in the grassroots politics, touching the people, particularly in state races, not so much congressional or Senate races. And so we won that race, and I was active his 8 years and helping him and advising him. And he was a wonderful, wonderful person. And so I had a lobbying firm, and I have a very successful lobbying firm. And we are substantive. We don't just ask for the bill number. We get in depth. We study. We know the client. We know the plant. We know the structure. We know the organization. We understand the device or whatever it is that we're trying to promote or prevent.
So you bring up a couple things I want to touch on,
Sure.
especially when it comes to the differences in politics at the time that you ran and now. So you talked about running for governor. A lot of big differences. We're in the middle of a governor's race right now as we sit here and do this interview. I'm sure it was completely different to run for governor. And you brought up grassroots politics. You know, we still have some of that, but a lot of it has changed a lot. So what do you feel are the biggest differences between the time when you ran for governor and now?
TV, money, money, money. That's all it is, TV and money. As I say, I'm still a great believer in the grassroots, particularly at state level. And you've got to still touch them. You've got to ask them. They want to be asked. That's what it is today, but at the same time, the Washington and New York advisors, consultants, all they want you to do is raise money so they can spend it and do the TV and whatever. And that's one of the differences. The other difference is the hatefulness and the cruelty anymore. If you can destroy your opponent, or if you can cut him down one notch, whether it's personal or not, that's what they do today. The first thing you do anymore is you don't research the background on your opponent. You research it on yourself. You've got to know everything about the candidate that you're supporting, or if you're running. Or if they came in here in my office today and said, I want to run for whatever, I said, well, take $100,000 of your own money, set it aside right now, and go hire a university professor or an investigator and have them research yourself. Bring your last 20 years of your income tax returns. I want every document, every contract, every issue. If you ever hit your wife, I want criminal records. I want all of those things researched about yourself, because you don't want any surprises. Don't want to get in the middle of the campaign and all of a sudden comes out that you beat your wife, or that there's a DUI out there, even though it was dismissed. All of those things you need to know about ahead of time. No surprises. And the other point is that when I was running, when I was in the legislature, we were all friends. We were all friends. Most of my clients are Republicans to this day. But the friends I have wonderful friends to this day that were Republicans at the time in the legislature or out of it. And so now, but you got to hate them. You got to dislike. You can't be seen having lunch with them or whatever if you're active politically on a statewide or national level. And I don't like that. I detest it. I detest negative campaigning. I detest trying to destroy the other person, whether the kids had a problem or all of our kids have problems more these days. And so let he who is out without sin cast the first stone. But anymore, the consultants, they want you to go negative immediately, then they go positive, and then they go negative again. Right now in this governor's race, you'll see a bunch of positive ads in the next few days. You'll see the wives talking about the husbands. You'll see the children talking about the dads and all of that sort of thing. But it's only because they've just demagogued the opponent. And that's across the country. Look at our nation's capital. Do you think you could ever be seen having dinner with a person of the other side? No, you can't. And so it's mean-spirited. That's not good for our country. But where are the stand-up people? Where do they stand up and say, enough's enough, I can't tolerate this? And nobody stands up. They're afraid to, because they're going to get knocked down themselves. But particularly in Congress, it only takes, I think, 5 years to vest your retirement. 5 years to vest your retirement. The best health care in the world for the rest of their lives and everything. And so if you're vested and don't have concern about that, who's going to stand up? Who's going to fight the Philistines? I mean, you talk about a legacy. Everybody's a legacy. Duh. The legacy is what? Nothing. You didn't stand up and fill the gap, save the land, so to speak. And they don't do it. And there's no stand-up people. It's a sad time in the history of our political parties and our country, our state.
I want to talk about the governor's race a
Sure.
little bit more.
Yeah.
So you said you came out of it flat broke, and I bet it was pretty devastating too. I know you had worked up to
Yeah.
that point for quite some time.
I'd worked all my life
Right.
to be governor. I'd worked at the legislature 10 years. I'd done all these other chairman of the board of tax appeals. I was, a commerce commissioner. I was chief of staff. I was, on and on and on. Yeah, it was very disappointing to me. But at the same time, I handled my loss and held my head and went straight ahead. Never looked back. Never looked over my shoulder. And I try to tell these folks today. I just dictated a letter yesterday I can't handwrite notes anymore because I don't have the energy because of all my stuff. And so I dictated, second best thing. And so I was just telling somebody yesterday about the honor of his father and the way, where is he? Where are they? On both sides. It's, handle your loss, handle your victory with the same amount of grace and style. The best thing I ever did in my life, professionally, was handle my loss okay. I was $166,000 in the hole. Had a debt of that. Nobody wanted to help me, of course. And Carter's 23.5% 23.5% interest rate. So then I get audited, and they refuse the interest I was paying, and so I tried to deduct that, and they said that's a campaign contribution to yourself, and not a deductible, legitimate interest in. And I told them, I said, listen. You need to audit the winners, not the losers. I said, there's where the money is. It's the winners. I said, don't pick on us. We're trying to pick up the pieces.
Right.
And so started my law practice back, and
that's the thing.
Never
You went
looked
on
back.
to build a huge, successful law practice.
Yeah.
So it was a difficult loss, but at the same time, is there anything looking back you wish you would have done differently, or?
I don't have many regrets in my entire life. I've said this, and maybe people disagree with it, whatever. Every good thing that's happened to me, I earned. Every bad thing that happened to me, I have earned. It wasn't good luck or bad luck. I earned all of it, and so I've reflected many times. Whether you have regrets. I don't have many regrets. I really don't. I feel very comfortable with my life. Feel very comfortable with what I've been able to accomplish, and I feel good about myself. My only regret right now is that I have been sick, and I haven't been able to come in the office at 8:30 every morning instead of 12.
So the
But
work
I get here
ethic's
from
still
about
there.
12 to 6.
Yeah, that's still a good work day, though.
That's still a work ethic. Yeah, I've always had the good work ethic, and I try to instill that in younger people today, and their work ethic or their work attitude is somewhat different than mine in our era, and when I tell my crowd around here, we have security desks. And I said, you can write all the good briefs, you can win the lawsuits, and you can write great letters and all these things. But I said, I could tell you who are going to be the players 10 years from now. They said, how's that? I said, at the sign-in desk downstairs at the security office on Saturdays and Sundays. And so I said, no, you can't. We're not a Dolly Parton 9 to 5, 5 days a week. You got to be more than that. That's okay to 9 to 5, but you got to have more than that if you're going to be special. And so I caught some of them. We caught some of them coming in for church, and they'd come in and sign in and then leave and go to church. And I did, that sort of thing. But they still don't know whether we look, or Jim Frazier's my managing partner. They don't know whether they really look, and we start checking that now. Let's see who signs in and who doesn't.
That's a pretty good role.
Yeah.
So before we move on,
Yeah.
It sounds like you don't have any regrets at all, and that's a wonderful thing.
Very few.
Is there anything that you didn't get to do in terms of Kentucky politics that you wish you had?
Well, of course, I never had a desire to be in Washington, because that was screwed up before Kentucky, before it got screwed up, before the bitterness and that exists down there today. If you say yes, I say no. If you say support, I say oppose. All of those kinds of things, just because. If you're for it, I'm against it. Doesn't make any difference. What's the issue? Well, I don't know what the issue is, but I know that he's supporting it, or he had a press conference, or something like that. And it's just hard work. You don't have to have a Phi Beta Kappa key around your vest. Hard work overrides that. The old thing about the guy that graduates from the Ivy League up east, and he runs out to the world, said, world, said, I've got my AB, what do we do now? And the world says very sternly, said, go back and learn the rest of the alphabet. That's the point. You got to work, you got to earn it. There's no easy steps. As I say, there's no good luck and bad luck necessarily, but it's not worth taking the risk of waiting on the good luck to come along. You earn good luck, and you also earn bad luck.
So what are some of the biggest lessons that you feel that you've learned from Kentucky, from your time in Kentucky politics, from the loss, from working with the Clintons, from everything you've done in Kentucky politics? What are the biggest takeaways?
Treat people right. never burn a bridge. That little person that's seated there at a desk will be of far more help to you than the head of the department. Of just don't burn a bridge. It's I love and enjoy people, and if you treat them right, they'll treat you right. There's a lot of lonely people in this world, in this state, and I have been in lots of homes where the phone never rings. There are a lot of lonely people, and then reaching out to them, and I spend a lot of time writing letters, writing notes, calling people. And I called one guy the other day, and then I realized I was sicker than he was. I said, gosh, but that makes me feel good. I've been to many hospitals, nursing homes, things like that, just to reach out to people, and treating them right is that's just good. It makes you feel good. If you write a letter or you go see somebody, I say number one is for you, and it makes you feel better. Anyway, that's the one thing that I've always tried to do is regardless of race, creed, or color, or wealth or lack thereof, treat them right. Treat them the way you'd want to be treated, and it pays off.
So we've talked a lot about how, especially both parties this day and age, are pretty bad about not following the advice you just gave, treating each other well.
Yeah.
You were the head of the Kentucky Democratic Party, so what are the biggest shifts you've seen within the Democratic Party since that time? How's the party itself changed? Well,
the party itself changes because the left has taken over much of the party, and sometimes the left, the extreme left, is more interested in policy than they are in getting elected, and sometimes they lose sight of the ultimate goal. You can't put policy into play if you're not elected and serving, and so I've seen that, and I think that so then they pick the fights within the own party with the moderates or middle of the road or whatever, and so is some of these zealots that win at all costs. I mean, mine's the issue. I mean, whether it's abortion or whether I think we've spent more money on abortion, and nobody's ever changed their vote. Not one person. And if we took all that money, we would have probably cured cancer and heart disease both. I'm not getting in the fight of abortion, but I'm just simply using that as an issue of we haven't accomplished anything at all in that regard. But we've wasted a lot of time and effort and painful hurt by that kind of an issue. And we waste a lot of time on one issue, people. And if you're not my way, get out of here. I'm not going to vote for you. And so we waste a lot of time on things you can't do anything about.
What were some of the biggest goals that you set out to accomplish? You got involved in politics at a very young age.
Yeah.
What were some of the biggest drivers for you wanting to get involved, and what were some of the things you really wanted to change within the system?
Well, when I went to law school, I ended up working in state Democratic headquarters. Jack Kennedy was running a long time ago, and he was Catholic. But where I was raised, I didn't know the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant, or a Jewish, or Catholic or whatever. It didn't make a difference. We were all a little old town. None of us had money. Nobody had any money. and every parent had to work every job they could, and so when Jack Kennedy was running for president, everybody was afraid to be for him because he was Catholic, whatever that meant. The Pope was going to be the president and not Kennedy, and so I was able to step in state Democratic headquarters in Louisville, and all of a sudden I was elevated because nobody else would fill the gap. Everybody was afraid, and they used to call them two-button people, and they'd wear one button, outside and one inside on the lapel, and so I learned then. So I got actively engaged, and as I said, when I ran for state representative, I never thought I'd get elected. Didn't expect to get elected. But once I did, I took it serious and went on, and I was stories probably never been told, but they were going to elect a speaker, and Norb Bloom and I were so I was called to Owensboro, and they said in a little room, hotel room, and they said all of y'all were for Combs, and so but all the leadership, quality guys, were for Combs, so we're going to have to pick one of you. And said, Terry, so we want you to be speaker, but you've got to agree to do anything we want to do. I said, well, I'm loyal, I stick, I turn out the lights. Can't do that. I can't. I was fishing down Kentucky Lake at the time. My dad and I were down there. And I said, I can't do that. I got to reserve the right to object. And they turned to Norb Bloom and said, Norb, what about you? And Norb said, anything you want, JR. And said, you're the speaker, and meeting adjourned. I had regrets about that for a month or so, but after that I felt good about it. Never regretted doing the right thing. I'm not saying that I've always done the right thing, but I did then, and I was proud of it. And I would have been speaker, and I've often thought about whether that would have turned in a different direction in my career or whatever, but I had no regrets in that regard.
So how did your priorities or goals that you set out to achieve kind of evolve over the years, especially after something like that?
Well, as you know, mine was, I never did have high priorities. I probably have surprised my mother and father and myself as to my successes. I had more fun running Patton's campaign because that felt like it was my campaign, so to speak. But I never did I never did start out in Greenup by myself, and the first income was $2 and the next was $3. Next was $3, and I was hungry at the time, but I never then ever thought that I would end up. You realize that we're the only law firm in Kentucky of any size where everybody on the letterhead is alive, and we're all still practicing law, and we're all still in the same firm. And a couple of my guys have been with me for 50 years, and I never thought that I would be able to accomplish that. And I surprised myself over the years, not because I felt that I was smart, bright, but I knew I had a lot of common sense, but more importantly, I had an energy and the willingness to give the effort to override or overcompensate for maybe a lack of the Phi Beta Kappa key. And so if you've got the work ethic, you can override a lot of those things. And that's kind of what I've been able to accomplish. But every step was better than I had thought it was going to be. but it was only because I'd worked for it and prided myself in that. And I was the one that would have been signing that sign-in sheet down at the security desk on Saturday and Sunday. Other than going to church, glad to be right here. And so you can't expect your troops to work any harder than you do, and you can't. I call my office world headquarters anymore, but you can't expect your troops to work any harder than you do. And so you set the example. You got to set the example, and dress nice. As I tell my lawyers, I don't have a coat and tie on it because of this cancer. I just can't hardly button my shirts anymore because of the numbness of my fingers and my feet, and among other things. But I tell them all. I said, we probably charge more than we're worth, so we can at least look like a lawyer. We can at least. I want my CPA. I want my doctor to look like a doctor. I want my nurse to look like a nurse, and I want them to look professionally because that instills confidence. I'm not a great believer in dress down. I think when you're wearing loafers, you're loafing. I'm wearing loafers, but I'm about half loafing anymore. I earned the right. But my mother used to say, if you've got one suit, don't wear it on Sunday. Wear it during the week because you don't have to impress the Lord. You don't have to. Said the Lord looks on the inside, not on the outside. And so you have to impress businessmen and clients. So wear that one suit that you got during the week and not necessarily just on Sundays. And so I've always adhered to that. I've always worn a coat and tie, and I've attempted to dress nice from the very day I started practicing law in Greenup. We used to walk fast and carry a briefcase, had nothing in a briefcase, and I wasn't going anywhere other than across the street to drink a cup of coffee, but I'd have my tie out, And then I was on the volunteer fire department for all the time I was in Greenup till I moved down here. And they used to call me the best dressed fire truck driver in the state of Kentucky because the first person, the fire whistle would blow and my office was right across the street, and the first person to the station got in the truck, and the second one would answer the phone as to where it was. But I'd always be first because I was right there, and I'd have a coat and tie on, and all that sort of thing. So I'm a great believer in looking nice and dressing up. And dress down doesn't do anything for you, I don't think. Just because you pay $5 to a charity, that still doesn't get it done. You ought to look nice and dress nice, look professional at all times, day or night. When they're down here at Tony's or whatever, they're a McBrayer lawyer.
Right.
And they so it's not just, we have runners all the time. They're wearing T-shirts or shirts that says McBrayer on them. And when they're out and about, I tell them, listen, you're a representative of me, of us, of all of my 150 employees. And you got to recognize that. And so I don't want to hear of you being drunk, or I don't want to hear of going too far. Mm-hmm. So I've always been a great believer and pretty tough on them.
I was going to ask you about advice for younger generations, especially people running for politics. I think we've covered a lot of that. We're sitting in your office right now. You have books everywhere, and you've told me you read every single one of them. So what are some other good practices or just advice that you would give to people to stay on top of things and really to move forward?
Well, you got to read. You got to read I read the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Courier and the Herald.
And the bottom line, I hope.
That's exactly right. Every day, and I tell all my crowd, you got to read. You got to stay current. Well, I didn't know that. Well, dummy, it was in the paper, or I mean, it was online, or what? Well, and you got to do that, but you got to hustle. You got to commit, and you got to be committed, and also you got to be committed as a team. You can't do it alone with your wife not in it. She's got to buy into it, and it's tougher on the wives than it is on the husbands by any means. And so it's really tough on the candidate or a wannabe candidate. It takes 10, 12, 15 years, whatever, to build up to get ready to run for whatever, whether it's state representative or whatever. But it takes a wife's commitment as well. If you don't have a wife's commitment, a family commitment, you shouldn't be running. So that's one of the things. And then you got to be active. You got to go from. I remember I went to Paducah all the way from Greenup one time. Drove, man, going down through there. I spoke to 35 women, and they gave me a set of cufflinks, and I was wearing a short sleeve shirt. And the point, I drove all the way down there and drove back that night because I had to make a living. I had to practice law the next morning. I didn't have any money. My dad had 8th grade education, worked on the railroad. My mother and I graduated from college on the same day. So, it's one of those deals. And so you've got to be willing to go beyond. You've got to be willing to pay the price. If you're not willing to pay the price, and if you just want to go to the big games, so to speak, Louisville and UK playing, doesn't work. You've got to be able to. If you go to a rally or a dinner or whatever, you got to be able to stand there and not eat.
Right.
Candidates don't eat. Those types of things, you've got to be able to mix and mingle with people. If you don't like people, and I could go through some names of candidates that did not do well because they basically don't like people. And I'm not saying this in an unkind way, but they're uncomfortable with people. And if you don't have a warm feeling about trying to help that little lady over there, or trying to do something good for people who can't help themselves, then you shouldn't be running in the first place. But if you don't have some kind of natural love affair with people and a warm desire to want to help them, then you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. And you've got to do that. And if you don't, it comes out. It's very clear as to whether you really sincerely like people or not. I had somebody in there a while ago kind of joking, said, I apologize. I said, no, you don't. I said, I can see on your face that it's an artificial apology. We were joking, but you've got to be able to like them. You've got to be able to do it. Some have been successful and faked it, but you normally can't fake it, and it comes out. And so you go into a room, and here's 250 people, and you immediately to go Jim Bob because you know Jim Bob, and you'll stay over there and talk to Jim Bob. Well, how'd you do tonight? What'd you do? I said, man, it was great. They were all talking. All you did was stand and talk to Jim Bob. You didn't meet any of these other people, and those kinds of things. So it's hard work. It's commitment. It's a love or enjoyment and liking of people, and it's basic. It's just 101, but you got to understand the issues. You got to understand the game. It's very complex. If you don't understand Medicaid, Medicare, pensions, and things like, if you don't grasp those, there are only 4 or 5 people in the legislature that really understand pensions, that understand certainly Medicare, Medicaid. I remember just a few years, the only person in the entire legislature that knew anything about Medicaid and Medicare was Jimmy Lee from over to Elizabethtown. And they'd all go to Jimmy. What do you think? And whatever Jimmy said, that's the whole legislature, they just approve it. But one guy out of 138 knew anything about it, and he was a wonderful guy. And then he got beat, and nobody knew anything. So they all had to, a few had to step up and bone up, but it's some complex issues today that there are no simple solutions. People try to find simple solutions to complex problems. It doesn't work that way. They're complex solutions to complex problems. And so you can't fake it long.
And do you think what you said about how multiple people within the legislature don't understand a topic, do you think that signals a problem within our election system? That we're electing people who don't actually know about these
absolutely.
Huge issues?
Yeah, it's
superficial. And how do we fix that?
Well, voters have to fix that somehow, and they have to pursue the follow-up questions and recognize the issues. The voters don't recognize how to detect it. They don't. How do they sift out the fact that they don't really know what they're talking about, and they're clueless, and that holds forth when I was there as well. I mean, it's not any different in that respect, other than they have now. The problems are far more complex, and they reduced it to the 2 or 3 people in a committee or whatever, and you're supposed to know something about crime and prisons over here, and so Medicare over here and pensions over here, and so the entire group doesn't understand it. We do it much different. Like in our lobbying team, we have 9 or 10, but everybody understands every issue. Every client, we have primary and secondary people responsible, but we all have basic understanding of the issues of our clients. And so when we're listening to one conversation in Frankfurt, or to a lesser extent in D.C., we might hear another conversation that helps one of our other clients and one of our other lobbyists. And so lots of things have changed, and not necessarily to the better.
So to wrap everything up then, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I think to talk about that point in particular, what do you hope to see for the future? What do you hope for the future of Kentucky politics, especially through all the lessons that you've learned during your time in Kentucky?
Well, I'd like to see less bitterness. I would like to see people get along with each other, and it doesn't take much effort. It's just a step up of a couple of guys or a couple of gals or a governor or whatever to reach out and just start being common courtesy, being nice to each other, and lowering the guard on how you treat each other, and just back to common basics. It's the same thing in Washington, and I think it's kind of flowed down. And so I would like to see, more than anything else, people get along with each other, and somehow reduce the so-called penalty of being seen with each other. You can't have a drink with them, you can't have dinner with them, you can't be associated with them, you can't room with them, you can't share a room, or you can't drive up here in one car, you can't carpool, and all those sorts of things. And so it's a bad time in the history of our country and our state when there's so much bitterness and attacking the other, and anonymous letters and late night telephone calls, and anything that would personally hurt the other side, and tear them down rather than build them up. And until that subsides, I don't see us improving much. I would like to see it's not all bad in Congress to have a House and a Senate of equal parties and in control, and a president, of one party or the other. And in Frankfurt, I would like to see a little more balance, and that kind of gets more respect, and rather than absolute control, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, either one. So it's I am a glass half full guy, and I have great hopes that it'll do better. We'll improve. But from what I can see right now, I really don't see much hope in an improvement of our leadership on both sides.
Well, Mr. McBrayer, I really appreciate you sitting down with me and taking the time to discuss all the lessons you've learned and your time in Kentucky politics.
Well, thank you, Jacqueline. There's a lot out there, and there are not many of us left, and so I'm honored that you're asked. Older folks like to be asked. They like to be asked for advice. I like for the young lawyers to come in and ask for my advice, and those sorts of things. And so there's a lot to share. You're realizing that. I'll just add one other thing. I had an older crowd politically that I was well connected with, in addition to a younger crowd. So I've been kind of one of the few that would have both. That would have a younger crowd, then the Breathets and the Combses and the Doc Beechams and Harry King Lowman and all of those guys over the years that were politically strong in the 70s. I've maintained that friendship with all of them. They had Pritchards and all of those guys. And then at the same time I have benefit of the young ones. My only trouble is my older ones are all dead. And I miss them all because I have many wonderful stories about them all. Thank you.
We have a lot to learn from you all, so it's great to be able to hear, because like you said, there's definitely room to improve in all forms of politics. So it's been great to talk to you, and I really appreciate it.
Good. Thank you.